by the great nebulas. Another tedious day of teaching these bright-eyed youngsters about the most backward corners of our glorious galaxy, Professor Kalaxx muttered, adjusting his fourth set of arms while organizing his teaching materials. His iridescent scales shimmered under the artificial lighting of the Galactic Academy's lecture hall, a prestigious institution that had stood for over 10,000 cycles. "Good morning, class," Professor Kalaxx announced, his voice modulator carefully calibrated to project just the right amount of condescending authority. "Welcome to Advanced Primitive Planetary Studies. I am Professor Kalaxx, and I hold 17 degrees in comparative xenobiology, with a special focus on less developed worlds." The professor's upper eye stalk swiveled to scan the diverse array of students before him. Blob-like gelatinians, crystalline proxians, and even a few gaseous nebulans floated in their environmentally controlled study pods. But there, in the front row, sat something that made his scales bristle, a creature that shouldn't have survived its own evolution, let alone achieved space travel a human. "Now then," he continued, pulling up a holographic display of the Milky Way. "Today we begin our fascinating exploration of what we categorize as death worlds, those peculiar planets where only the most resilient life forms manage to exist. Take, for example, this utterly chaotic ball of disaster called Earth." A few tentacles raised in the back of the classroom, but Professor Kalaxx ignored them. He was on a roll now, his favorite topic explaining why Earth should be classified as uninhabitable. Just look at these readings. Temperature variations of over 50 degrees in a single rotation. Atmospheric pressure that would crush a proxian's crystalline structure. Gravity that would flatten a gelatinian into a puddle. And don't even get me started on the electromagnetic disturbances they call weather. The human student in the front row, Marina Rhodes, sat there with what the professor could only interpret as an annoying smirk on her face. Her dark curly hair was tied back in what she called a ponytail, a term that still baffled him considering humans had no actual tails. "Miss Rhodes," Professor Kalaxx said, his voice dripping with artificial sweetness, "since you're our guest from Earth, perhaps you'd like to explain to the class how your species manages to survive in such primitive conditions? Without proper environmental shields? Without genetic optimization? Without even basic atmospheric controllers?" But Marina leaned forward in her seat, that insufferable smile growing wider. The other students turned their sensory organs toward her, curiosity evident in their various forms of body language. Professor Kalaxx noticed her knuckles crack as she flexed her fingers, a sound that made his scales quiver with discomfort. "Actually," Professor Marina replied, her voice carrying a tone that promised trouble, "I would love to explain exactly how we not only survive but thrive on Earth. But first, I have a question about your expertise in primitive planetary studies. Have you ever actually visited Earth?" The professor's scales shifted from their usual elegant purple to a slightly flustered magenta. "Well, that is to say, my research is based on thoroughly documented." The class buzzed with anticipation. This was going to be an interesting semester indeed. Professor Kalaxx quickly regained his composure, his scales settling back into their professional purple hue. "Ms. Rhodes, while I haven't personally visited Earth, my extensive research spans over 300 scholarly works about your quaint little planet." 300 works written by authors who've never visited Earth, either, Marina asked, raising an eyebrow. A few gelatinians wobbled in what might have been suppressed laughter. "Now see here," Professor Kalaxx huffed, all four arms gesturing simultaneously. "Let's look at the facts. Computer, display Earth's natural disaster statistics." The holographic display filled with images of hurricanes, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and tsunamis. "Your planet experiences approximately 15,000 earthquakes annually. You have over 500 active volcanoes. Your oceans, which cover 70% of your surface, regularly produce waves taller than this building." And Marina shrugged, causing several nebulons to pulse in shock at her casual dismissal. "We surf those waves for fun." "You." What the professor's voice modulator cracked. "Surf. You know, ride the waves?" For entertainment, Marina pulled out her personal device, displaying images of humans surfing massive waves. "This one's my cousin Thomas catching a 40-footer at Nazare." The class erupted in a cacophony of surprised clicks, whistles, and electromagnetic pulses. A crystalline Proxian student named Zix raised their faceted appendage. "But Professor, you said anything above 20 units of wave height was unsurvivable without shield technology." That's because it is," Professor Kalaxx sputtered. "Miss Rhodes must be using some form of protective equipment." "Nope," Marina grinned. "Just a wetsuit and a board. Oh, and speaking of natural disasters, want to see videos of storm chasers?" Storm chasers, a gelatinian student named Bloop quivered. "You chase your atmospheric disturbances." "For science, for fun, and sometimes for both," Marina explained, pulling up more footage. "Here's my best friend Nicole, getting within 100 meters of an F4 tornado to gather data." Professor Kalaxx's eye stalks nearly tied themselves in knots. "This is preposterous. Next you'll tell me humans voluntarily climb those death traps you call mountains." "Mount Everest has a waiting list," actually, Marina responded. "Though personally I prefer rock climbing. More technical challenge, you know." The professor slammed all four hands onto his hover desk. "Now listen here, young lady. I've spent my entire career studying planetary hazard classifications. Earth ranks in the top percentile for environmental dangers. You have pressure systems that can tear buildings apart, temperatures that swing from freezing to boiling, and countless species of predatory organisms. Don't forget the earthquakes," Marina added helpfully. "My hometown, San Francisco, sits right on a fault line. Makes things exciting." A Nebulon student named Wisp condensed enough to speak. "Professor, if I may, it seems our theoretical models might not account for actual human capabilities." Theoretical models, Professor Kalaxx's scales now shifted to an indignant orange. "These are peer-reviewed studies from the galaxy's finest minds, who've never set foot on Earth," Marina pointed out again. "You know what would settle this? First-hand experience. I propose a field trip." The classroom fell silent. Even the ambient hum of environmental pods seemed to quiet down. Professor Kalaxx's scales cycled through several colors before settling on a pale yellow. "A field trip," he asked weakly. "To Earth." "Unless you're scared," Marina suggested, that maddening smile still on her face. "I mean, if Earth is really such a death world, surely an esteemed professor with 17 degrees wouldn't want to risk their scales. Though it might make all those peer-reviewed papers a bit less credible." Professor Kalaxx drew himself up to his full height, all eye stalks focused intently on Marina. "Young lady, are you challenging my academic integrity?" "Not at all," Professor Marina replied sweetly. "I'm offering you the chance to prove it. 1 week on Earth. No environmental shields, no atmospheric controllers, no genetic optimizations. Just you, me, and any other students brave enough to learn what real field research looks like." The class burst into excited chatter. Zix's crystalline structure sparkled with interest, Bloop rippled with anticipation, and Wisp swirled excitedly in their containment field. Professor Kalaxx looked around at his students, then back at Marina's challenging smile. His career, his reputation, and his entire understanding of planetary classification systems hung in the balance. "Very well, Miss Rhodes," he said finally, his voice modulator struggling to maintain its authoritative tone. "I accept your challenge. May the great nebulas have mercy on us all." The Academy's administrative chamber buzzed with activity as Marina stood before the Board of Galactic Education, outlining her proposed field study. Professor Kalaxx hovered nearby, his scales now a nervous shade of green. "Let me get this straight," Dean Vorksax rumbled, her crystalline form refracting light across the chamber. "You want to take our most prestigious primitive planetary studies professor and 3 students to Earth, without standard environmental protection?" "That's correct," Marina nodded. 1 week, 5 different Earth environments. If Professor Kalaxx still believes Earth is a death world after experiencing it firsthand, I'll withdraw from the Academy." "And if you prove your point," Chancellor Plex asked, his gaseous form swirling with curiosity. "Then the curriculum gets updated with accurate information about Earth and human capabilities," Marina replied. "Plus, Professor Kalaxx includes mandatory field research in his future papers." Professor Kalaxx's voice modulator produced something between a cough and a squeak. Surely we can arrange some basic safety measures? A personal shield generator, perhaps? Absolutely not, Marina grinned. We'll use standard human safety equipment only. Helmets for climbing, wetsuits for swimming, appropriate clothing for weather conditions. You know, primitive stuff. The professor's eye stalks drooped. But the atmospheric variations alone are completely manageable, Marina cut in. Look, I've already planned the whole trip. Day 1 Death Valley for desert adaptation. Day 2 Hawaii for volcanic activity and ocean conditions. Day 3 Colorado for mountain climbing and altitude adjustment. Day 4 Alaska for extreme weather handling. Day 5 New York City for urban survival. Loop, who had been chosen as one of the student participants, quivered. Will we need to consume Earth sustenance? Don't worry, Marina laughed. I've arranged for compatible nutrient supplements, though you're welcome to try a hot dog in New York. A hot dog. Zix's crystalline structure vibrated with concern. You consume canines at high temperatures. It's just a name, Marina assured them. Though wait until you hear about hamburgers. Professor Kalaxx cleared his throat, or whatever passed for one in his species. The terms of this challenge seem rather extreme. Perhaps we could start with something smaller? A simulation, maybe. Scared, Professor Marina asked innocently. Because I can show everyone the viral video of my grandmother skydiving on her 100th birthday. If a centenarian human can jump from a perfectly good aircraft for fun, surely a distinguished xenobiologist can handle a little field work. The administrative chamber filled with poorly concealed snickers. Professor Kalaxx's scales shifted to a determined purple. Very well, but I want it noted that I protest these reckless conditions. Noted, Dean Vorksack said, amusement evident in her crystalline resonance. Now, about insurance forms. 2 hours later, Marina led her small group through the Academy's preparation center. Professor Kalaxx obsessively checked his survival kit while Bloop, Zix, and Wisp received briefings on their specialized containment equipment. Remember, Marina explained, these are just basic environmental stabilizers, not full protection. They'll keep your core biology functioning but won't shield you from experiencing Earth's conditions. Think of them like really primitive life support. Primitive indeed, Professor Kalaxx muttered. Miss Rhodes, are you absolutely certain we can't bring just one small force field generator? Perhaps a pocket quantum stabilizer? Nope, Marina replied cheerfully. But I did pack sunscreen. You'll thank me when we're in Death Valley. Sun. Screen Wisp swirled nervously. You mean you combat solar radiation with cream? Would you prefer to hear about our historical solution? It was this thing called a parasol. Professor Kalaxx's scales turned almost white. You mean humans used to just hold up pieces of fabric against a Class G star's radiation? Still do. Sometimes, Marina nodded. Especially at the beach. Speaking of which, who's excited to learn about surfing? The professor's voice modulator made a sound suspiciously like a whimper. As their departure time approached, he clutched his research tablet like a security blanket, muttering about peer reviews and career suicide. Okay, Team Marina announced. Earth shuttle leaves in 30 minutes. Last chance to back out. Nobody moved, though Bloop's containment field rippled suspiciously. Professor Kalaxx drew himself up, all 4 arms crossed in defiance. We are scientists, he declared. We face the unknown with courage and dignity. That's the spirit, Marina beamed. Now, who wants to hear about Earth's weather phenomenon called snow while we wait? The professor's dignified pose lasted exactly 12 seconds into Marina's enthusiastic description of avalanches. The shuttle touched down in Death Valley at high noon. The landing pad's temperature display read 120-49 GC, and Professor Kalaxx's scales immediately turned a sickly shade of gray. Welcome to Death Valley, Marina announced, stepping out of the shuttle like she was walking into a shopping mall. Don't worry, it's a dry heat. Dry heat, Professor Kalaxx's voice modulator crackled. The atmospheric moisture content is below 10%. How are your cellular structures not crystallizing? Oh, that's why I brought water bottles, Marina replied, tossing hydration packs to everyone. Remember to drink regularly. Human bodies are great at sweating, but you guys might need extra hydration. Zix cautiously extended a crystalline appendage from their containment field. The thermal readings are unprecedented. My structural integrity analysis suggests. You'll be fine, Marina interrupted, already setting up a sun shelter. Your containment field will keep you from getting too brittle. Though you might want to stay in the shade, you're a bit sparkly for desert conditions. Loop, barely maintaining their blob-like shape, even within their environmental stabilizer, burbled nervously. The ground temperature exceeds normal metabolic parameters. That's why I got you these neat hover sandals, Marina explained, helping attach them to Bloop's containment unit. No direct contact with the hot sand needed, though you should see what humans do at the beach. Ever heard of the hot sand dance? Professor Kalaxx, who had been frantically taking readings with his instruments, suddenly let out a high-pitched squeal. There's a human child over there, running, in this environment, without protective gear. Marina glanced where he was pointing. Oh yeah, that's probably a local kid. Hey there, she waved at the young boy, who waved back before continuing his game of chase with his friends. But the professor sputtered, all four arms gesturing wildly. The solar radiation, the heat stress, the environmental hazards. Speaking of environmental hazards, Marina grinned. Who wants to see a scorpion? Wisp condensed so quickly they nearly overloaded their containment field. The venomous arthropods you mentioned in class? Surely you jest. Nope. There's one right. Here Marina carefully lifted a rock, revealing a scorpion that promptly scuttled away. Don't worry, they're more scared of you than you are of them. Usually. Professor Kalaxx's scales had now achieved a color previously unknown to xenobiologists. Usually. The next location change didn't help his composure. As their shuttle descended toward the big island of Hawaii, the professor's eye stalks nearly popped out of their sockets at the sight of active lava flows. Is that molten planetary crust? Zix asked, their crystalline structure vibrating with a mixture of fear and fascination. Yep, and check this out, Marina pulled up a video on her device. Here's my uncle giving a volcano tour last week. They get really close to the... Enough, Professor Kalaxx shrieked, his voice modulator hitting notes it wasn't designed for. You mean to tell me humans regularly approach liquid rock for tourism? Well, yeah, Marina shrugged. How else would we get cool photos for social media? The shuttle's diagnostic system registered 4 simultaneous stress spikes from its alien passengers. As they hovered over the landing pad, a massive wave crashed against nearby cliffs, sending spray higher than their aircraft. Bloop rippled in terror, while Wisp briefly dissipated into a panicked mist before reforming. Don't worry about the waves, Marina assured them as they landed. The surfing spot is on the other side of the island. These ones are too rocky. Professor Kalaxx's scales now displayed a pattern that suggested either severe stress or an upcoming molt. Miss Rhodes, are you implying there are waves larger than these that humans intentionally interact with? Oh yeah, way bigger, Marina nodded enthusiastically. Want to see my surfing videos again? No, came the unanimous response. As they disembarked, Marina cheerfully pointed out various volcanic features, each explanation making the professor's scale colors cycle through increasingly concerning patterns. When she mentioned the concept of volcano boarding, Zix briefly lost their structural cohesion. Just wait until we get to the mountains, Marina said brightly. Ever heard of free solo climbing? The professor's only response was a quiet whimper as he clutched his research tablet like a shield. The tablet, displaying his countless papers about Earth's unsurvivable conditions, seemed to mock him with every passing second. Right, who's ready for some practical desert survival? Marina called out cheerfully, unpacking what she called a basic hiking kit. Professor Kalaxx watched in horror as she laid out items that seemed insultingly simple compared to their advanced technology. A fabric covering? Wrapped water containers? Dried nutrient blocks, the professor scoffed, though his scales betrayed his nervousness. How can these primitive tools possibly? His voice trailed off as Marina expertly rigged up a solar, still using nothing but plastic sheets in a container. See, water collection from seemingly dry ground. Humans figured this out ages ago. Now, who wants to learn about finding edible cacti? You. Eat the local flora bloop wobbled incredulously. Sure. Watch this. Marina carefully cut open a barrel cactus, revealing its moist interior. Emergency water source. Though personally I prefer the prickly pear. Makes great juice. Professor Kalaxx frantically scribbled notes, his previous disdain giving way to reluctant fascination. But the spines, the defense mechanisms. Nothing a good pair of tongs can't handle, Marina demonstrated. Though my great-grandmother used to just burn the spines off and grab them with her bare hands. The aliens watched in stunned silence as Marina proceeded to build a solar cooker out of reflective material, start a fire using primitive friction methods, and create shelter from minimal materials. Next stop, ocean time, Marina announced after their desert demonstrations. The Hawaiian coast gleamed before them, waves crashing against volcanic rocks. Now, basic ocean survival involves understanding currents, wave patterns, and Marina began, but Professor Kalaxx interrupted. Surely you don't mean to enter that chemically volatile hydrogen oxide solution? His scales rippled with concern. You mean the water? Watch me. Marina dove gracefully into the waves, surfacing a moment later with a spear gun. Anyone hungry for fresh fish? Wisps swirled so rapidly in their containment field, they nearly created a miniature tornado. You hunt. Underwater. Manually. Well, we have fancy fishing boats too, but this is more fun. Marina grinned, already tracking a nearby school of fish. Also, watch this. She demonstrated various swimming strokes, diving techniques, and even basic surfing principles. The professor's note-taking became increasingly frantic. The pressure variations, the temperature fluctuations, the marine life encounters. Speaking of marine life, Marina surfaced again. Want to see how humans swim with sharks? Absolutely not, came the collective response. Mountain climbing proved even more disturbing for the alien observers. As they stood at the base of a Colorado cliff face, Marina cheerfully checked her climbing gear. These simple ropes and mechanical fasteners are your only safety devices? Professor Kalaxx asked weakly. Pretty much. Though sometimes we free solo, which means no ropes. At Marina began. Please stop talking. Zix's crystalline form shuddered. My structural integrity cannot handle this information. Marina scaled the cliff with practiced ease, setting up anchors and explaining technique as she went. The aliens watched in fascinated horror as she demonstrated crack climbing, rappelling, and boulder problem solving. Human vulnerability to gravitational forces should make this impossible, Professor Kalaxx protested. Nah, it's all about technique and finger strength, Marina called down. Want to try an easy route? The professor's scales turned an interesting shade of puce. I believe I'll continue my observations from ground level. New York City provided its own kind of chaos. The aliens huddled together as waves of humans rushed past them during rush hour. This is how you handle urban navigation? Bloop asked, their contained form quivering as another subway rumbled beneath them. Yep. Just got to go with the flow, Marina explained, expertly weaving through the crowd. Though wait until you see how we handle subway delays. Professor Kalaxx checked his readings again. The pollution levels, the noise pollution, the population density. All part of city living. Marina shrugged, hailing a taxi with practiced ease. Want to try the subway next? Or maybe check out a street food festival? Wisp's gaseous form condensed dramatically. You consume sustenance prepared on the public thoroughfare. Hot dogs, pretzels, halal cart food, it's all part of the New York experience, Marina enthused. Though maybe we should skip the dollar slice pizza joints for now. The weather endurance test in Alaska proved to be the final straw. As Marina happily demonstrated winter survival techniques in -20 degrees Fahrenheit, Professor Kalaxx finally broke. This is beyond comprehension, he exclaimed, all four arms waving in exasperation. You build shelters from frozen water. You travel on crystallized hydrogen oxide using primitive wooden planks. You voluntarily remain in conditions that could cause immediate cellular freezing. You mean skiing? Oh yeah, it's super fun, Marina beamed, strapping on her snowboard. Want to see some tricks? Tricks, Zix asked faintly. Marina launched herself off a nearby jump, executing a perfect 360 before landing smoothly. That's just a basic one. Should I show you the backcountry routes? There are more extreme versions of this activity, Bloop burbled in disbelief. Oh yeah, helicopter skiing, ice climbing, winter camping, Marina listed cheerfully. Though my personal favorite is the polar plunge. Polar plunge, Professor Kalaxx asked, dreading the answer. Yeah, you know, when you cut a hole in the ice and jump in the water. Great way to start New Year's Day. The professor's scales cycled through every color in his species range before settling on a defeated gray. Miss Rhodes, he said quietly, I believe I may need to revise several of my published papers. Great, Marina grinned, strapping on crampons for an ice climbing demonstration. But first, who wants to learn about avalanche safety? The collective groan from her alien companions was nearly lost in the howling Arctic wind. Back at the Galactic Academy, Professor Kalaxx sat in his office, staring at his collection of academic awards with new eyes. His scales had settled into a thoughtful shade of blue as he reviewed the footage from their Earth expedition. You know, Professor, Marina said, settling into a chair across from his desk, humans don't just survive Earth's conditions. We actively seek them out. We climb mountains because they're there. We dive into oceans because we're curious about what's below. We explore deserts because we wonder what's on the other side. The professor's eye stalks drooped. 300 years of academic research, and not one paper captured the true essence of human adaptability. Bloop, Zix, and Wisp floated nearby, their containment fields humming softly as they shared their observations. Did you see how they created tools for every environment? Zix's crystalline structure sparkled with excitement. Simple physics and materials, yet perfectly adapted for each challenge. And their temperature regulation, Bloop burbled. No biological stabilizers, just sweat and something called goosebumps. Their cities, Wisp swirled thoughtfully. Chaos and order existing in perfect harmony. Millions of beings, all navigating through spaces designed by pure trial and error. Professor Kalaxx picked up his most prestigious research award, Outstanding Analysis of Primitive Survival Conditions, and let out what humans would call a laugh. Miss Rhodes, he said, his voice modulator carrying a new tone of respect. I believe I owe you an apology. We've been so focused on defining survivable conditions that we missed something fundamental about your species. Marina raised an eyebrow. Oh. Humans don't just survive. You adapt, improvise, and somehow turn hostile conditions into recreational activities. It's not about endurance. It's about, he paused, searching for the right words. Innovation, Marina suggested. Determination. The sheer stubbornness of looking at a mountain and thinking, I bet I can climb that. Precisely, all four of the professor's arms gestured enthusiastically. Your species treats planetary hazards as challenges to overcome, Bloop offered. Puzzles to solve, Zix chimed in. Adventures to embrace, Wisp added. Yes, all of that. Professor Kalaxx's scales shifted to an excited purple. It's not about surviving Earth's conditions. It's about mastering them, understanding them, even celebrating them. Marina smiled. You should see what we're planning for Mars. The professor's scales briefly flashed white. Mars? But that planet is even more. Challenging? Hostile? Unsurvivable, Marina grinned. Sounds like fun, doesn't it? Professor Kalaxx looked at his research tablet, then back at Marina. Miss Rhodes, how would you feel about co-authoring a paper? I believe it's time someone wrote about Earth's conditions from a more practical perspective. Only if we can do the research in the field, Marina replied with a wink. I hear the Antarctic research stations are lovely this time of year. The professor's scales turned a new shade of purple, one that somehow managed to convey both dread and anticipation. 1 semester later, Professor Kalaxx stood before a packed lecture hall, his scales gleaming with confidence as he addressed the newest batch of primitive planetary studies students. Welcome, class, he announced, all four arms working holographic controls with practiced ease. Today we begin our study of what we previously called death worlds, but now referred to as adaptive challenge environments. Our first case study, Earth. The professor glanced at Marina, now his teaching assistant, who gave him a thumbs up from her position near the classroom door. But before we begin, he continued, his voice modulator carrying a hint of amusement, I should warn you that this course now includes mandatory field research. Thanks to our updated curriculum, you'll all be experiencing these environments firsthand. A wave of nervous murmurs swept through the classroom. Don't worry, Professor Kalaxx added, his scales shifting to a playful shade of violet. We'll start with something simple, perhaps a little Earth activity called whitewater rafting. Marina stifled a laugh as several Gelatinian students nearly lost their form. Oh, and one more thing, the professor said, displaying a new image on the holographic screen. The Academy has approved my proposal for an exchange program with Earth's educational institutions. I expect the first group of human professors to arrive next week. He paused, scales twinkling with mischief. Though we might need to reinforce the recreational facilities. Apparently, humans consider our normal gravity gymnasium rather tame. The sound of Marina's laughter echoed through the halls of the Galactic Academy, followed by the distinct thud of several alien students fainting in their containment pods.